So I still remember the day I first came in here, and the business was for sale, but there was no indication of where it was. So I did some sleuthing, and it was I was able to like figure out what I thought was the place. It was like beach town, California cool. So I came into this place. It was called Chop Street, and I thought, well, this space is cool enough. I like the front of the house. It's like manageable. But then I remember talking to the bartender, and he was like, "Oh, the space is so big in the back." And it's kind of funny now because as soon as I looked at it, I was like, "There's no way I could put a brewery in here." The concept was good, but I just thought that maybe it went back real far. But unfortunately, his idea of a lot of space isn't the same as mine as a lot of space. So here you have it from left to right. This was a full kitchen. They started out doing salads, and then built in the beer and the wine, and ended up doing a full kitchen. There was broilers in here, ovens, a double standing oven, fryers, 2 fryers, grills. But anyway, I took all that out except for one large refrigeration unit here, like a missing place that we could do all our pickled vegetables and run sausages and beer baths and on the grill. And when I basically took the rest of the stuff out, and there was a small office that I cleaned out and put the brewing equipment in. And then I used all the space up to the ceiling. But even the stove was one of the few pieces of hot equipment that I kept for the kitchen. And I kind of stuffed them over here in the corner, and I have a whole 1/4 of an inch between that and my mash tun. That was all the space I had. We had to measure this place 2 or 3 times, and the fabricators of our equipment, Practical Fusion, tried to talk me out of the 5-barrel system. They said, well, maybe we should go to a 4-barrel system, which, when you look at your finished beer, it is closer to 4. But I was sort of stuck on, what, I want as much firepower in as small space as I can get. That way, I'm utilizing every square inch, and I'm getting my square foot worth of space. So yeah, I jammed it in here. I have hoods already in place. The gas was behind here, so we went with natural gas for the boiler, or not the boiler, but when I say boiler, I mean the kettle. And the mash tun is just insulated, single infusion. I added a coil in my hot liquor tank just so I could do some step mashes if I'd like to. I had worked on a really beautiful Casper Scholl system before this, and we were just able to do anything. We had a mash mixer, and I kind of missed that. So I knew I couldn't fit that in here, but I was like, how can I make this system as versatile as possible? And the coil enabled me to do mash outs, step mashes if I wanted. I can still do single infusion, triple infusion, whatever I like, but it just gave me a little bit of versatile space with a smaller amount of equipment. They wanted to hinge the mash tun, and I wasn't able to do that, so we have a lift-off type ability here. And then the hood over in the kettle area actually had to be raised a little bit just to fit the kettle in. Originally, they designed a little bib, sort of bikini type deck, and instead of having the bikini deck, I ended up putting this little, it looks like it's about 8 by 10 or 12-inch deck in, and it's really a spot to put my beer, but it's the only way that I can step up and actually look into my kettle and get on top of the kettle to work. And then when we did all the piping, I really wanted them to do all that in the fabrication place, so that was tricky. I have all these different ideas from working for years in different breweries of what I could, I'd like to be able to isolate this tank and wash this tank while this tank's going on, just to optimize my brew day so that I didn't have to wait until I was done with the whole process before cleaning. So I put a lot of different isolation valves in for that. So eventually I think the fabricator had to tell me, you got to stop. I can only give you this many valves because normally they did a manifold with swing arms. So they had a really small central area where everything happened. And I kind of spread it out really long and added all this process piping in, which they were happy to do for me, but it was a little more complicated in the design. I had to work really closely with the fabricators and just adding chillers in for wort samples, all kinds of fun stuff. And I didn't have any room for a cold liquor tank, just a hot liquor tank. So what I enabled to get around it, and since we're at the beach, I really needed to fabricate my own water too. So I put an RO system in. In the RO system, there was a small one that had a tank that was attached to it, and it was just a little holding tank, but it's just enough water that I could use in my mixing station. The only thing I had to do is I was trying to optimize it, so I ran it through my heat exchange. Now the heat exchange normally has wort running through that to chill it down. So I have like on-demand cold water. So I chill it down just to make my RO water go a little further in the process. So there was just some interesting things that I had to worry about. With the hot liquor tank, a lot of guys that have nanos, they do on-demand hot water heaters. I already had a hot water heater here, so in order to save money, well, I can't really save money. It would have been nice to do it on demand, but I really like the idea of having a huge hot water tank. So mine's like 12 barrels, and it really enables me to, like, if I wanted to do a double batch, I could. I can clean the same day I'm brewing. I just don't have that part of a bottleneck. So I have a lot of water, and it works as a holding tank for all my RO water. So I'll fill that thing with RO water, and then when I'm doing my heat exchange, I'll actually blend back in some filtered city water. And that way, every single time I'm brewing a batch of beer, I have to test my water because it's always sort of a moving target. So it gives me an opportunity to sort of slow the process down and think about all my losses, what I can do with losses. Because we have a kitchen and we do sausages, I'll have beer in a line that I'm using to keg. Well, in any kind of production, you just shut the valves off and dump what's in the line. You can't serve that. So for me, I'll use it for cooking the brats in for a beer wash, a beer bath for the brats. We use some of that beer in making beer cheese that we use for our soft pretzels. So I'm always trying to think about the waste of a brewery and the waste products of any restaurant and how we can utilize those because of our margins being small, because we are a small space. Even our chemicals, by having a CIP skid, even on this small level, I'm putting a lot less any kind of chemicals down the drain because I'm titrating and reusing those chemicals as long as I can. I'm always thrifty and always trying to use something that I already have. So I threw in like a fitting, and this was when I got the restaurant, this was an old cutting board. So I cut this down and attached it to here. And this is actually my grain hoe. So this is how I get my grain out. This comes out and it's a little low to the ground, which makes it difficult, but because it's a small system, I don't have a lot of grain to get out. And then normally you have large bins to get your grain out. I just have a couple storage bins, so maybe 5 or 6 of those, and I can get almost all my grain out. And then I have, we started out with a chicken farmer, and right now we have a goat farmer, so they use it to supplement the grazings. So he's always happy to hear that I got grain coming out. So that's the basic process there. The only problem is I try to brew on a day or early enough that the kitchen's not in working order, or they're not doing the restaurant service, because it's really hard to be cooking in this space when I'm actually mashing out. So I'll do it either early morning, or I like to do it on the days that we have the kitchen closed. So that gives me a little bit more space, and then I make it tidied and put it all back in order so the kitchen can take over. The kettle, about a 90-minute boil. This is so close, it's actually pretty much looks like it's touching the mash tun. We had to just sort of position them in such a way to gain a little bit extra space. Then you move over, and my steam and my gas affluent all go out the hoods. So this nice long hood, 2 different hoods, sort of works really well for us. So instead of having to always have just one on or the other on, I can kind of mitigate between the two. We have a grant over there, and a lot of these systems, when I was getting them designed, I'm used to always working with a grant with a little larger system. But some of the small systems don't have grants. Along with that Casper Shoals I had that I'd been working on previously, it had a really small, tight, enclosed grant that wasn't open. Usually they're atmospheric. So I had I had them develop a little bit of a hybrid for me. So it just gives me a sight glass and a small enough space that I can kind of watch the flow, and I can kind of dial it in so that I don't get a stuck mash. But it just gives me a little bit of a control of flow as long as I keep my eyes on it the whole time. And there's a lot of process piping with throwing that coil into my hot liquor tank so that I was able to do some step mashes and just sort of fine tune in some temperatures if I needed to. like a little Hermes coils in there. I had to throw a bunch of extra valves on so that I could use the one pump that I have, since it's only a one pump system. Besides the hot water, the hot liquor tank also has a hot pump. But this just enables me to sort of get the flow to be able to go through, pull out different areas. It was kind of fun to create. We have CIPs everywhere. We can bypass them. Unfortunately, the force of that pump isn't enough to wash the kettle and the hot liquor at the same time, but it still enables me to use that as a reservoir so that I don't have to do a whole separate cycle of 30 minutes. And there even is a really low point over at the Grant, which is nice because this is a dump for the kettle, but I still needed a low point for my process piping. So it was fun to design it, and even in putting in this piece here is really nice. It was added in at the last minute. I try to go off my RO water, or I can even run my hose right through and use just a regular filtered city water. But it gives me an opportunity to chill down a sample really quickly. I can run the wort over and bypass the heat exchange and run it through the hot liquor tank, and then I bring it back into the other side. I can also run a separate pump and clean through here. Going in this port, I can clean the mash tun while I'm boiling. So if I was in a real hurry and wanted to do two things at the same time, I could be cleaning that tank while I'm working through here. So it was a lot of fun working with the fabricators. The fabricators are really good at creating a brewery that will make beer, but what they don't always look at is the efficiency of being able to multitask many different things at the same time. So that's where the brewer comes in and says, oh, well, I need certain ports here and I need certain ports there, so that I can take my 10-hour day and make it an 8-hour day. And part of the efficiency about opening in another space was there were already 2 electrical panels here, but there was a third one that had our address on it, and it had conduit running right up to the back door, but no one had pulled the wire. So it could have been a project that got scrapped early on in another restaurant here. There was this was originally the original fire hall where they housed the engine, but they also did a bakery in here. There was I think an Italian deli in here. So there's a lot of electric, there's a lot of an older building, a lot of older electric. But when we were looking for the permits, we didn't want them getting into all that, so we decided to run all our own new electric for this system. So we had that 3-phase system, and we made it work. And it was tricky. I found a used chiller that was, I think, 10 horsepower, and it was for a wine company, but I got a great deal on it. So we had to isolate the 2 different circuits because I didn't have the power to run both at the same time. So I was able to save a little bit of power by isolating the circuits and just running one. We ran this pump in here. This is 3-phase pump, so everything that we ran had to be 3-phase. The heater in the hot liquor tank was 3-phase. There was some, the RO system. I put in a keg washer. Everything had to be set just to run off of that. So all the planning went with just all the new electric and wiring. That way, for permits, we were just, all we need is a new wiring diagram, and that work had to be done. So we just had to minimize. The kitchen was a complete remodel, but besides some of the walls and the electric, we tried to minimize that to make opening the place a little bit easier to do when it came into permitting. The other one was the floor drain. We had to get that clouded into our electrical permit. But we just ran it was really easy because we ran the floor drain the whole length of this area, minus a foot or 2 on either end, and we were able to go right out the back building, and this area is a raised area from the back. So the front is a little higher than the back. So it was really easy to come into our floor, go right out the back, and then tie into the sewer. So there was just all these dynamic things that made using this space a little more cost effective and a little bit easier and streamlined. And it made opening a lot easier as well. The hood's in place. The way that we were able to put the drain in and tie into the sewer. The electric was already conduit, with a panel already here. We just had to run the wire and then isolate for permits what we were going to do to open up the space and to make it into a brewery. Here's my hot liquor tank. That's run electric. Instead of using gas, I went with an electric burner for that. And that's nice. And, it gives me the efficiency. I think when A lot of other breweries I've worked at, we're just full bore all the time. But for me, saving a little extra money on the electric I only heat it up when I need the water. It's pretty quick, and I can circulate it out. All through here is a bunch of controls for pumps and for my heat exchangers down here. I'm running glycol up to the ceiling. My tanks are about maybe a ½ inch in some places that are off the ceiling. So I try to utilize my space as much as I could. One of the ideas when we came in, I didn't have a space in here to actually lift these tanks. The fermenters are on the bottom and the bright tanks are on the top. In order to get it through, I bolted them together and we brought them through, and I stood them up through the exhaust intake or the actual intake in the middle of the ceiling. It was the only place that I could get that kind of leverage to bring it up and stand it up without hitting the ceiling. We had to make a little extra space. There's a ferrule usually on the top, and then you have an elbow that would attach to that. Well, the fabricator gave me an extra inch or two by cutting that ferrule out and just adding the extra elbow on the top of the tank and welding it directly to the tank. That just saved us an extra inch or two. That gave us the capacity we needed. But it was just really difficult to fit everything in with all the process piping on the sides of the tank. There's very minimal space in here. There's a little teeny space between the next two fermenters that I can kind of wedge myself through and kind of get back in there if I have to do any work on the back of the system where the glycol enters the tanks. But everything is super, super tight. I had to slim down in order to make this brewery work. There's a lot of dynamics when it comes to glycol that you can do. There's like first in, last out kind of stuff. We can make it really efficient and really balanced. But when it came down to cost, I had to do something that worked, that was a little more cost effective. So I just ran a real simple system. I have 3 fermenters and 3 bright tanks. So I just came in off my chiller on a simple L and brought it back. The drops were all done. I did the whole top in copper, and then the drops are all done in a flexible hose. I had to look at the copper was more expensive, but I knew that the longevity of it would have been great. A lot of people will use PVC, and you can get away with maybe gray PVC, but it's just not meant, even though a lot of people are doing it, it's just not really meant for those temperature fluctuations. When I purchased a chiller, I was able to take all the wine solenoids that were in their system as part of the purchase price. So I didn't know if they'd work, but I put them in place and they're working fine. So I was able to use that and save a little money on that as well. But the glycol system is all insulated as best I can. That way there's not any condensation. I ended up using insulation and even running caulk through the insulation to seam it really well. Some of the stuff is used zip ties in order to seal it all. So this one is 2 drops that go right to my heat exchange in the front where I can get to them. The other ones are all behind the tanks, so they're not as visible, but they're all really well insulated and a pretty simple design. You can get a little more complex, but I kind of started filling from the bottom and moved up through the tanks, and I didn't do a lot of paralleling because I wanted my jackets to work together, and I wanted to minimize the cost of all the valves and unions. So it seems to be working really well. These smaller tanks don't always make sense to isolate because they're not gigantic and the volumes are smaller and the chilling capacity is just as efficient this way.